the first time I went to hear this is a funny story, if we're all lucky. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll find out. The first time I went to hear my sister speak in New York, Ronald Reagan was president, though he did not know it at the time. And I went to the East Coast. My sister was speaking at Columbia University. I made a whole trip of it. I visited all my family for the first time. I visited my grandmother in New Jersey. It was the last time I saw her before Alzheimer's rendered her incapable of recognizing me. She had just reached that stage in the disease where every time she saw me, she thought it was my birthday and gave me $5. It was exhausting to deal with. I had to keep walking in and out of that room. And for the record, that is not a self-loathing anti-Semitic joke about a cultural relationship with money that values it above human decency. That is a self-loathing anti-capitalist joke about a society that has a relationship with money that values it above human decency. She was at that place where she was still sort of coherent, but every conversation had turned into a surreal 1970s game show. I went into that place with the buildings and the smell. Manhattan, yes! I was with that incredibly boring lady. Aunt Sarah, no! Flowered dress, bad breath. My mom, no! Incredibly long stories, I can barely tolerate her. Your best friend, yes! We saw that horrible man. I need more clues. He used to be horrible in New York, and then he was horrible all over the country, and now he's horrible from space. Howard Stern? Yes! Congratulations, Grandma. You're going on to the dementia pyramid. Who are you people? Things you say at dinner. Where am I? Things you shout from the bathroom. Ed Asner, Benjamin Netanyahu, people you mistake for your dead husband. Ding, ding, ding. I know people get uncomfortable. Some people come up to me after shows. They say after shows, they say, you shouldn't make jokes about Alzheimer's. That's tragic. It was my grandmother who told me, Dylan, we are Jews. We don't believe in tragedy. We believe in horror, atrocity, and injustice. We recognize them all as hilarious. Of course, she also said we must never forget. You gangrene me, I will waste time sipping. I don't mind playing this game, people. I remember when I was 8, she used to be so funny. I was like 8 years old. I went to her, I said, Grandma, I'm going to camp. I'm going to ride horses. I'm going to play guitar without missing a beat. She said, really? I went to a camp once. Spent 9 months of my life hanging out in the yard with the gypsies and the queers playing liar's poker. Pair of threes. 3 5s. My grandfather was still alive then. He grinned, he saw the opening, he dove right in. He said, that's when I fell in love with your grandmother. Do you know how smart you have to be to win with the same numbers every day? Besides, I always liked skinny Giles. I saw her across the yard. I thought, my God, her tights are loose. Then I realized she wasn't wearing tights. Oh, we get a little judgy tonight, don't we? This is my grandfather's wedding ring. My wife wears my grandmother's wedding ring. It was the most romantic night of our marriage, the night we dug up my grandparents and stole their jewelry. So I did that weird, and then I visited my parents up in Boston. My mom was all freaked out because, she was dealing with her mother's decline. She said, Dylan, you have to promise me when I start to show symptoms, you will tell me so that I know when it's time to take my own life. I said, Mom, we just had this conversation 20 minutes ago. My relationship with her is very difficult. About a year ago, I finally got tired of her asking when my wife and I are going to have kids. I said, Mom, we're not going to have kids because I do not like children. And very brightly, as though it was something we could bond over, she said, oh, you get that from me. My father, on that trip, my father, and please understand, my father is not an idiot. My father had, at this point, he was the associate provost for the arts at MIT, or as most people pronounce it, arts at MIT. It was a perfect. That was like 4 people who went to MIT. We're going, finally, a reference that appeals to us. West Hollywood jokes. It's a perfect job for him at MIT. And while I was there, I got to see his Heisenberg Uncertainty opera, terrific production of an epic musicale, during which it's possible to accurately determine the momentum or the position of the fat lady at any given time. A show that can't find its natural resolution if anyone is there to see it. People left the theater every night in tears going, what about the cat in the box? Was the cat in the box okay? He got the job when a member of the search committee happened to be in England and saw his Cambridge University Physics Department production of The Pirates of Penzance, starring Professor Stephen Hawking as the Pirate King. The singing wasn't great, but the choreography was innovative. Don't be scared, people. Stephen Hawking himself has heard me do that joke and tells me I'm a very funny man. Although, in fairness, it is impossible to tell when he's being sarcastic. In any case, my point is, my father is not an idiot. A very smart man, but he said, I've been listening to these self-help CDs, these subliminal self-help CDs. I have never felt better in my life. This is the best program in the world. You must buy the whole set. You must buy the whole set. And I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I picked him up. And I started listening to him on the plane back, and I was listening to him in my sleep for a long time. It's nature sounds. You don't hear whatever the actual message is there. It just sounds like crickets in a field or a pod of whales. But I have to tell you, this is the best program in the world. I've never felt better in my life. You must buy the whole set. You must buy the whole set. That was weird. So I did all of that, and then I got down to New York to see my sister speak at Columbia University. Ronald Reagan had a welfare reform proposal that was based on the concept that the best way to discourage people from being poor is to take away their money. And my sister had a lecture. She was brilliant. My sister is brilliant. I should explain a little bit. My sister is gay. I love her like a brother. And she is the single mother of a beautiful daughter who was deliberately conceived in a loving act between my sister and a turkey baster that was briefly filled with a mail-ordered sperm. Just one of the reasons I will not do Thanksgiving dinner at my sister's place. Mom, get that out of the butter. You don't know where it's been. We just had this conversation 20 minutes ago. She has this beautiful daughter, and she was briefly on government assistance, not because she is a slacker or a drain on society, but because she had been fired from a bartending job when the manager found out that on her breaks, she had been breastfeeding her infant in a back room. At an establishment, understand, that proudly displays posters of the Coors Girls. Because we live in a bizarre society where it's okay to use breasts to sell beer, but not to feed children. So she was doing this lecture on the welfare reform, and I went to hear her speak at Columbia. And then she was done, and I left. Because they make you. And I wound up walking across northern Manhattan to a bus stop much farther north on the island than any young middle-class white guy has any right to be, as it was nearing midnight. It was January, it was very cold, and I sat down at a bus bench to wait for the bus. My breath steamed in the night air. And a large African-American man came out of the building behind, well, it was the early 80s, so still a big black guy. And for the record, that is not a self-aware, ironic joke about how everyone's too politically correct. It is a self-aware linguist's joke about how the language of political correctness changes over time. Came out of the building behind me, sat down next to me. We sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the night air. And after about 5 minutes, he said, "Give me all your money." I said, "What?" He said, I'm mugging you. I said, "Well, do you have a knife or something? Like now we're playing Let's Make a Deal. Can you show me a hard-boiled egg?" He said, "If you want, I could go in and get a knife." I didn't want that. So I gave him the $6 that I had in my pocket. And then we waited for the bus together, with our breath steaming in the night air, until I realized there was a problem. And I said, "Well, now I can't get on the bus." And he said, "Oh, sorry," and handed back $1, which was, at the time, the cost of a bus ride on the island of Manhattan. And I accepted the $1 and said thank you to my mugger. And we sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the night air. And then the bus came. Empty bus, heavy woman driving. I got on, I put my $1 in the machine. I thought about saying, "Hey, this guy just mugged me." But now it was $5 he'd taken. It felt less like reporting a crime than telling on a guy. So I just put my $1 in. I got on the bus. He got on behind me, fed $1 to the machine, sat a few rows back from me on the bus. After we'd gone a few blocks, he tapped me on the shoulder. I said, "What?" He held out, too, with the remaining $4 and said, "Why don't you take half of this money back? You really always ought to have some cash on you." That seemed sensible. I took the $2. Again, I said thank you to my mugger. Drove on. After we'd gone several more blocks, he rang the bell. Yes, he rang the bell. That's right. He cried the news to the whole town as he rang his bell and shouted, "Hear ye, hear ye." He pulled the cord that rings the bell and tells the driver that he wants to pull over. Driver pulled over. As we're pulling over, he taps me on the shoulder. I said, "What?" He held out the last remaining $2 and said sort of sheepishly, "Well, why don't you take the rest of this money back? I really just needed bus fare." And it dawned on me for the first time that we live in a bizarre society where it's less humiliating to be a criminal than a little short on cash. By now, I felt like I had bonded with my mugger. I pushed the $2 back into his hand and said, "Why don't you hang on to that? You really always ought to have some cash on you." He thanked me and got off the bus. We pulled away from the curb. Apparently, the driver had caught the tail end of this conversation. Apparently, she was a Reagan Republican, because as we pulled back into traffic, she said, "You really shouldn't give them poor people money. It only encourages them."